I returned home earlier than expected from the business trip, only to hear my daughter and her husband discussing something they never wanted me to know about. They had subscribed to a funeral insurance policy worth $1 million and were planning on how to eliminate me. What happened next will shock you. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Ben Jacobs from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I wasn't supposed to be home that night. The conference in Dallas had wrapped up earlier than expected, and instead of waiting for the morning flight, I took the red-eye. I thought I'd surprise them. My daughter, Vanessa, and her husband, Ray. They'd moved in 6 months ago after falling on hard times, and I'd done what any father would. Opened my doors, no questions asked. It hadn't been easy adjusting to the presence of 2 more adults in a house I'd shared only with the memory of my late wife, but I did it because I loved her, and I loved Vanessa even more. I walked through the front door quietly, suitcase in one hand, the scent of stale coffee and laundry detergent floating through the air like a ghost. The house was dark except for a glow spilling from the kitchen. That's when I heard them, muffled voices, tense but unmistakably familiar. At first, I thought they were arguing. My instinct was to step in, mediate, maybe remind them they were living rent-free. But then I caught a sentence that made me freeze. 6 months, Ray said, his voice low and clinical. We wait 6 months, then your dad's gone. No one will suspect it. Not after the policy kicks in. I ducked behind the hallway wall, my heart thudding so loudly I thought they might hear it. Vanessa's voice came next, a little shaky but disturbingly calm. He trusts you. He still thinks you're his friend. If you can get him to take that hiking trip in the spring, somewhere remote, it'll look like a freak accident. Just make sure it looks clean. I felt bile rise in my throat. My own daughter. My flesh and blood. I fumbled for my phone, hit record, and held it toward the kitchen like a weapon. I needed to hear every word. I needed proof that this wasn't some delusion, some nightmare bleeding into real life. They went on for nearly 15 minutes. Details, insurance policies, timelines, even my funeral arrangements. I stood there, numb, absorbing each word like a blow to the chest. Vanessa laughed at one point. Laughed, talking about how they could finally travel the world with Dad's money once it was done. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The man she spoke of wasn't me. It was some faceless ATM they needed to unplug. And Ray, my so-called son-in-law, was the architect. But it was Vanessa who approved every plan. My little girl, who used to fall asleep in my lap watching Saturday morning cartoons, was plotting my murder with the man I fed and clothed under my roof. I didn't confront them that night. I waited until their voices faded, waited until they went to bed, and I stood in the dark of my study for hours. I listened to the recording over and over, tears carving silent trails down my cheeks. I thought about her mother, what she would have said, what she would have done. I thought about how I had no one left to talk to. Not really. My best friend, Lionel, was mentioned in their conversation too. Apparently, they were planning to manipulate him into taking me on a dangerous hike next spring. They thought I wouldn't see it coming. They thought I was already dead. By sunrise, I had a plan. I made copies of the audio file and emailed it to myself, then backed it up on a flash drive I kept in my safe. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I just sat in that house, pretending everything was normal while my stomach twisted into knots. Vanessa made me coffee the next morning like nothing had happened. "You're back early," she said, smiling, brushing a hand over my shoulder like old times. I stared at her for a moment too long, and she raised an eyebrow. "You okay, Dad?" I forced a nod. "Just tired." Over the next 2 days, I played the role of oblivious father perfectly. I sat through dinner, watched TV with them, even laughed at Ray's stupid jokes. But every second I was around them, the rage inside me simmered hotter. I'd raised her better. Or so I thought. I remembered working 3 jobs when she was a kid just to keep her in private school. I remembered selling my classic '67 Mustang to pay her college tuition. I remembered holding her hand when she cried after her miscarriage and defending Ray when he lost his job the third time. All of it for this. For greed? For a policy payout? It was 2 days before I took action. But during those 48 hours, I mourned like a man who'd lost his only child. Because in every way that mattered, I had. I wasn't just betrayed. I was gutted, violated, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I would never look at her the same again. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. Cold, calculated, and signed in ink. And when I finally confronted them, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I made damn sure they remembered my face, my voice, and the look in my eyes when I said, "Get out of my house and out of my life." I didn't sleep that night or the night after. I'd always thought of insomnia as a symptom of stress or age, but this was something deeper, a kind of spiritual unrest. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning uselessly overhead, wondering when exactly I had lost my daughter. Was it when her mother passed, and I threw myself into work to stay sane? Was it when she married Ray, a man I'd always found charming, too charming, and I bit my tongue about my doubts? Or had I lost her long before that, slowly, quietly, in ways I didn't notice until it was too late? Every memory I had of her felt contaminated now. Birthday parties, school recitals, college graduation. Her eyes used to light up when she saw me. Now I realized it was just the reflection of opportunity. She saw me not as a father, but as a bank account with a pulse. By sunrise, I was already at my desk. I pulled out the documents they had left lying around. Some of them so arrogant they didn't even bother to hide the paperwork. I found the policy confirmation tucked in a drawer under old junk mail. The beneficiary name printed right there in black ink, Vanessa Holloway. My name, Thomas Holloway, was listed as the insured. The amount, $1 million. I flipped through the forms, my hands shaking, and found signatures. Dates. The agent's name. It was all real. It wasn't a bad dream or a sick misunderstanding. They'd filed the claim 3 months ago and had been waiting for the policy to mature before putting their plan into action. Everything had a timeline. Everything was organized. I scanned the documents, took pictures, stored them in a hidden folder on my laptop, and another on a separate flash drive I kept in my gun safe. I was terrified they'd find the evidence before I could act. I needed advice, but not from someone who'd pity me. I called my old friend Howard, a retired attorney who still kept a sharp mind, even if his knees had long betrayed him. I didn't tell him everything at first, just enough. Hypothetically, I said, what if someone took out a life insurance policy on a relative without their knowledge? Is that legal? Howard was quiet for a long moment before answering. It's not illegal, strictly speaking, if you gave consent. But if you didn't, that's fraud. And if there's talk of removing that relative, that's attempted murder. Plain and simple. I told him everything after that. Not the emotional parts, just the facts. The recording, the documents, the conversation I overheard. Jesus, Tom, he said finally. You need to go to the authorities. Immediately. But I didn't go that day. I needed to be ready. Completely ready. There was still part of me. Maybe the part that had rocked Vanessa to sleep as a baby, that wanted to be wrong. That wanted to believe this was some twisted joke or misunderstanding. But the voice recordings, the papers, the deliberate way they moved around me like I was already gone, it all screamed otherwise. The next night, I set up cameras in the hallway and living room. I wanted to capture behavior, patterns. I wanted to make sure this wasn't just a moment of drunken stupidity, but an actual plan. What I got instead was even more damning. I watched as Vanessa and Ray whispered to each other late into the night in the kitchen, checking their phones, looking at calendars. I watched as they joked about Dad's diet and how they'd make sure he eats what Lionel gives him on the trip. It made me sick. Lionel, my best friend of 20 years. They were going to use him as the fall guy, feed me something to weaken me during the hike, then make it look like an accident. Vanessa even mimicked my wheezing when I climbed stairs. He's slowing down, she said, giggling. It'll look natural. I nearly threw my laptop across the room. But instead of reacting, I compiled. I cataloged every video, every clip, every photo. I started building a folder labeled Evidence, Vanessa and Ray. I backed it all up in triplicate. The weight of it all pressed into my chest like a concrete block. Every father dreams of walking his daughter down the aisle, holding her first child, retiring with pride. Not every father prepares an evidence folder to hand over to homicide detectives. I felt old in a way I never had before, like my life had already ended and I was just living in the shell of it. I spoke to the insurance company's fraud department 2 days later. I sent the audio recording and a redacted version of the documents. The woman on the other end of the phone was polite at first, then dead silent as she listened to the file. "Sir," she finally said, her voice low, "this is extremely serious. We'll be escalating this immediately. Please do not inform the parties involved until we've made formal contact with law enforcement." I hung up the phone and stared at the living room, the couch where they'd sat watching Netflix the night before, laughing like they were innocent. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt fury. The last straw came the next evening, when I overheard Ray on the phone in the backyard, telling someone they were just a few months away from freedom. I could barely contain myself. My hands clenched into fists so hard my knuckles cracked. I knew then that I wasn't dealing with misguided youth or desperate freeloaders. I was living with predators, people who smiled to my face while mentally planning my funeral. That night, I drafted an eviction notice. I emailed copies to myself, then printed them out and tucked them into envelopes. I placed them on the kitchen counter under their coffee mugs, with their names in bold letters across the front. And then I waited, because the confrontation was coming. And this time, I wouldn't blink. They came downstairs around 9 in the morning, moving like people without a care in the world. Vanessa wore my late wife's favorite robe, pink with tiny embroidered roses along the collar, while Ray clutched his coffee like he had earned the right to breathe under my roof. They saw the envelopes on the counter and froze. I watched them from the dining room, silent, my arms folded across my chest. "What's this?" Vanessa asked, already frowning. Ray picked his up and flipped it over like he was checking for a check inside. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch. I wanted it to feel heavy, permanent. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. But there was something in it that made Vanessa drop her mug. It shattered on the tile, a sharp crack that punctuated the moment like a period at the end of a death sentence. "You have 24 hours to get out," I said flatly. "Both of you. The locks will be changed tomorrow morning." Vanessa blinked. "Wait, what?" I walked into the kitchen, slow and deliberate. "Do you know what it feels like to hear your only child plan your death for money?" I asked. "To hear her laugh about how easy it'll be once the policy matures?" Ray opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "No, you don't speak. Not one word. You'll get your chance when the cops knock on your door." Vanessa's face went pale. Ray's turned red. "You went through our stuff?" she asked, trying to sound indignant, like I was the one who'd crossed a line. I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound I didn't recognize as mine. "I recorded you," I said. "I watched you. I cataloged every slimy, calculated word. You thought I was too old, too trusting, too stupid to catch on. You thought I'd just die and make you rich." She took a step toward me, hands out like she could smooth it over. "Dad, listen, don't call me that," I snapped. "You don't get to anymore." She flinched, and for a second, I saw the little girl I used to tuck into bed. But it was gone just as fast, replaced by this stranger who wore her face. "I didn't mean to." "You did, Vanessa. You meant every word. I have the recording. I have the emails. I have the policy documents. And so does the insurance company. This isn't about misunderstandings or heat-of-the-moment garbage. This was planned, organized. You and your husband sat in my kitchen and mapped out how to kill me. I don't care what your reasons were. I don't care if you were desperate. You lost me the moment you put a $sign on my life." Ray finally found his voice. "You can't prove anything in court," he spat. "It's just talk. We didn't actually do anything." "You didn't yet," I said, stepping closer. "But premeditation is a very real thing, Ray, and the police will care. And the insurance fraud unit definitely already does." He lunged forward like he wanted to intimidate me, but I stood firm. For the first time since all this began, I wasn't afraid. I was disgusted. I was done. I pulled out my phone and hit play. The kitchen filled with their voices. Their laughter, their plans, their sick little jokes. Vanessa gasped. Ray cursed under his breath. I let it play for a full minute before pausing it and putting the phone back in my pocket. Not the quiet tears of guilt, but the panicked sobs of someone watching their scheme collapse in real time. Please, she said, grabbing my arm. I didn't want to go through with it. Ray pushed me. He said it was the only way. I was scared. I stared at her hand on my sleeve until she let go. You weren't scared. You were greedy. And now you're out of chances. The eviction notice stood. They left the house that afternoon, packing their things in a haphazard rush. Vanessa tried again. More tears, more pleading, but I didn't say a word. Ray muttered threats under his breath as they slammed the door for the last time. I called the locksmith before the sound of their car engine faded down the street. By sunset, the locks were changed. The security system was updated, and I sat on the couch in the silence of a house that finally belonged to me again. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like grieving. That night, the detective I'd spoken to earlier called me. We've started the process, he said. The insurance company filed an official report. It'll take a bit, but the case is moving. And Tom? I've seen a lot of things over the years. But this is cold. I'm sorry you had to go through it. I thanked him and hung up, but his words haunted me. Cold. That was exactly what it was. Not impulsive, not desperate, just calculated, like I was already in the ground. I walked through every room that night, touching furniture, photographs, pieces of my life. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd wanted to pass down. It all felt tainted now. I sat at my desk around midnight and opened a new document titled Last Will and Testament. It was time to decide who would get everything after I was gone, because it sure as hell wasn't going to be her. There was a strange freedom in finality. I sat at my desk for hours that night, the glow of the monitor casting long shadows across the walls, and began rewriting the will I had drafted nearly a decade ago. That one had been simple, everything to Vanessa. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, the property in Lakewood I'd inherited from my brother. All of it had been meant to give her a life free of worry, to make up for every sacrifice I thought she never noticed growing up. Now, as my fingers hovered over the keyboard, I felt none of that paternal pride. I felt clarity. Cold, precise clarity. I deleted her name with a single keystroke. Erased her like she had tried to erase me. In her place, I typed the Hopewell Children's Home, an orphanage I'd donated to for years. Kids who had nothing, not even parents to betray them. I reviewed the draft 3 times before printing it out. The lawyer would need to notarize it, but the ink on the paper felt permanent. I stared at the words for a long while. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about meaning. If everything I worked for had to go somewhere, it would go to children who might grow into people with actual souls. I thought about my daughter, how she'd respond when she found out. I pictured her screaming in some gray prison visiting room, begging to be let back in my life. But the truth was, she had no place in it anymore. I didn't care about her tears, not after what she had planned. A few days later, I drove out to Hopewell. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up. The place wasn't fancy, just a modest brick building with a cracked basketball court and faded swing set. But there was something about it that felt genuine. A woman named Martha met me at the door. Middle-aged, kind eyes, soft-spoken. "Can I help you?" she asked. I told her I'd been a quiet donor for years and asked if I could walk the grounds. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Just be mindful. Some of the kids don't trust strangers easily." I nodded, understanding more than she realized. I walked the halls and peeked into the rooms. Bunk beds, posters, stacks of donated books. I passed a boy, maybe 12, sitting in a corner drawing superheroes on printer paper. He glanced up and offered a shy smile. That single look hit harder than any courtroom sentencing ever could. These kids had been abandoned too, but not by choice. They didn't grow up plotting against the people who fed them. They were victims of life, not predators of it. When I got back to the front office, Martha asked softly, "Did you lose someone recently?" I paused, then said the only truth that mattered. "Yes, but I'm still grieving someone who's alive." She didn't press, just gave me a brochure and told me the door was always open. Back home, the silence had changed. It used to ache, used to stretch across the house like an open wound. But now it felt earned, necessary. I turned off my phone and unplugged the landline. The texts had started pouring in. Vanessa, from whatever temporary jail cell they'd stuck her in, had somehow found a way to reach me. A week later, I met with my lawyer to finalize the new will. He was an old-school type, buttoned up, sharp-edged, and always 3 steps ahead. He scanned the document with furrowed brows. "You sure about this?" he asked. "It's unorthodox, Mr. Holloway. Most parents don't cut their children out unless she planned to kill me," I said flatly. She and her husband took out a $1 million policy and spent months figuring out how to make it look like an accident. I have recordings. Evidence. The insurance company filed a report. The police are involved. He stopped flipping pages. "My God," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said. "Just make it legal." We notarized it that day. Signed. Sealed. I even took a photo of myself outside the courthouse, holding the envelope like it was the last chapter of a book. A clean cut. A deliberate line in the sand. Still, the neighbors had started to whisper. It was inevitable. Vanessa had friends in town. Ray had drinking buddies. People talked. I overheard Mrs. Penwell, the widow next door, on her porch phone one evening. "No, it's true. Tom kicked them out. Said they tried to kill him." Can you imagine? I didn't correct her. I didn't care. Let the rumors run. Let people look at me sideways in the grocery store. At least I was still alive to be seen. But the hardest part wasn't the stares or the silence. It was the damn memories. The reminders. I'd walk past the hall closet and remember how Vanessa used to hide there during hide and seek. I'd hear a song in the car and flash back to family road trips, her feet on the dashboard, singing off-key. These weren't just echoes, they were sucker punches. My grief came in waves, and it was cruel. Because I wasn't mourning death. I was mourning deception. Mourning who I thought she was. I took down every photo of her. Packed up the albums, the drawings she made in 2nd grade, the wedding pictures where I had given her away with a full heart and teary eyes. I boxed them up and put them in the attic. Maybe someday I'd burn them. Maybe not. But they had no place in my life now. Not when they felt like lies. It started with a letter. No return address. Just my name scrawled across the envelope in handwriting I knew too well. It was shaky, desperate, the loops in her Y's collapsing inward like they couldn't support their own weight. I nearly tossed it in the trash unopened, but something stopped me. Maybe I needed to see how far she'd fallen. Maybe part of me wanted confirmation that the daughter I raised really was gone, and not just hiding somewhere beneath all that greed. I sat at the kitchen table, turned the envelope over in my hands, then finally slid my finger beneath the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. "Dad," it began, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you, please read this." I almost stopped right there. The audacity of it, begging for a second chance when she had planned to bury me before spring. Still, I kept reading. She said Ray had filled her head with lies, made her believe I had been hiding money from her for years. She said he convinced her that I was planning to cut them off, that he manipulated her fears of being poor again. "I know I let it go too far," she wrote. "I know what we did was unforgivable. But I was scared, and I thought." That's when I stopped. Scared? Thought what? That a murder plot would fix her fear? That she could undo the intent just because she hadn't followed through? She was in jail now, awaiting trial, and the only thing she wanted was absolution. As if my forgiveness could clean her conscience faster than any courtroom verdict. I folded the letter, walked it straight to the fireplace, and fed it to the flames. I watched her words curl and blacken until they were nothing but ash. But that wasn't the last letter. They came weekly, sometimes from her, sometimes from her attorney, once even from a social worker assigned to her case. "Vanessa is deeply remorseful. She has no one else. She talks about you constantly, says she made the worst mistake of her life." I didn't respond. I didn't call. I didn't visit. My silence was my sentence, and hers. But then the phone call started. Somehow, she'd convinced the jail staff to let her leave messages. The first time I heard her voice through the answering machine, I nearly smashed the device to pieces. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Please, just talk to me. Please." The next one was longer. "I understand if you never want to see me again, but I just need to hear your voice. Just once." It became a ritual. Every Sunday, a new message. New apologies. New promises. It was like she thought if she just said sorry enough times, it would reverse time, erase the planning, the policy, the laughter. But I remembered it all. I had to remember it. Because that recording was still on my phone, and every time I felt my resolve slipping, even a fraction, I played it again. Her voice, so calm, so casual. The way she talked about my death like it was a line item in a spreadsheet. No amount of tears could undo that. But it wasn't until the social worker showed up at my door that I truly felt the ghost of her clinging to me. I didn't recognize the woman. Early 30s, soft-spoken, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Holloway?" she asked. "I'm Sandra McCain. I work with the Inmate Rehabilitation Unit at the county jail. May I come in?" I wanted to slam the door in her face, but something about her eyes, wide, not pushy, not judging, made me step aside. We sat in the living room, and she didn't waste time. "I know this is difficult," she said gently, "but Vanessa asked me to speak with you. She says she's written and called, but you haven't responded." "Because I have nothing to say," I said flatly. Sandra nodded. "I understand, and I'm not here to pressure you. I think it's important you know she's not the same person anymore. She attends therapy sessions daily. She talks about you constantly. She's terrified you hate her." "I don't hate her," I said, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. "I don't feel anything. That's worse." Sandra sighed. "She still calls you her dad. She still hopes you'll visit, even if it's just once." I leaned forward then, stared her dead in the eye. "She doesn't exist to me anymore. You understand? The woman in that jail cell might have my daughter's face, but my daughter died the moment she decided my life was worth $1 million. Sandra left shortly after that, and I knew I'd been firm enough. But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, like I'd just slammed a door on a ghost, and it was still rattling the walls from the other side. I sat in that silence for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling everything. The next day, I visited the police station to drop off the final audio files I'd been holding back. The detective handling the case, Tommy Rios, a kid I used to coach, met me with a grim expression. "They're still trying to negotiate a plea deal," he told me. "She's claiming Ray masterminded everything, and that she was just along for the ride." "Doesn't change the recording," I said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. But you should prepare yourself. If he flips first, she may walk with less time." I looked at him hard. "I don't care how much time she serves, as long as she never walks through my door again." That night, I made one final change. I called the Hopewell Children's Home and arranged a transfer of assets, partial funds now, the rest upon my death. Martha sounded shocked. "This is incredibly generous, Mr. Holloway. I don't know what to say." "Just promise me those kids will never end up like mine," I said. "That's all I want." The morning I handed over the deed to the Hopewell Children's Home was overcast, the sky heavy with low-hanging clouds like a lid about to close. It felt fitting. Martha met me at the front gate, a clipboard in hand and disbelief written all over her face. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "The property, the remaining funds, the bonds, they're yours now. All the paperwork is with my attorney." I had arrived early, before the kids would be back from school, because I didn't want an audience or applause. This wasn't a performance. It was a severance. The final act of taking everything I once built for my daughter and placing it in hands that could never betray me. I didn't expect gratitude. I didn't even want it. I just needed peace. Inside the home, everything was quiet except for the muffled hum of a radio playing somewhere down the hall. Martha offered to give me a full tour, but I declined. I'd already seen enough. The humble dormitories, the overused rec room, the classrooms with chipped paint and laughter lingering in the corners. I handed her the keys to the Lakewood property and watched her eyes water as she took them. "You could have left this to anyone," she said. "You could have sold it." "I was going to leave it to someone," I said, until she tried to leave me 6 feet under before I got the chance. Martha didn't press. She didn't need to. She was the kind of woman who carried enough sorrow to recognize it in others without naming it out loud. She placed her hand gently on my forearm and nodded. "This place will remember you, Mr. Holloway, whether you want it to or not." I offered a faint smile, though it barely reached my eyes, and left without another word. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the old swing set. It creaked in the breeze, a soft, mournful rhythm, like a lullaby gone sour. Back at home, I began the final purge, not just of documents or assets, but of ghosts. I boxed up everything left that had even a whisper of Vanessa, baby pictures, her school trophies, the diary she once left open on the kitchen table in 7th grade, the onesie her mother had saved in a cedar chest in the attic. It all went into storage, sealed and labeled "Do Not Reopen." There was no anger left, only resolve. It wasn't that I couldn't forgive. Hell, I'd forgiven worse from strangers. But forgiveness without change was just permission for them to hurt me again. And I was done bleeding for people who mistook love for leverage. A few weeks passed. The trial was postponed twice. Ray had started cooperating, and the DA was leveraging every ounce of pressure they could to get both of them. Vanessa's attorney reached out once more, this time with a formal request for a character statement. She believes a letter from you could change the sentencing. The email read. Even just a few kind words. I didn't even respond. Instead, I attached the same audio file I'd submitted months earlier and hit send. Let her words speak for themselves. But closure doesn't come with court dates or revised wills. It comes in the quiet, in the stillness after everything breaks. I started going on morning walks again, taking the long trail behind the church down by the creek. The same one I used to take Vanessa on when she was small, her fingers wrapped around mine like I was her whole world. Now, I walked alone, but not empty, not anymore, because I had finally given my grief somewhere to go, somewhere it could bloom into something better. Those kids at Hopewell, they didn't know me, but they would feel the impact of my decision every day. A new library, better mattresses, more teachers, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at a life where betrayal didn't come from the people who were supposed to protect them. One evening, I passed a neighbor while tending to the hedges. She looked at me like she didn't know whether to ask the question or not. "Tom," she said finally, "do you ever hear from your daughter anymore?" I wiped my hands on a rag and stood still for a moment. "No," I said. "She doesn't exist to me." The woman winced slightly, but said nothing more. We both knew it wasn't cruelty. It was survival. I went inside after that, locked the door, and made myself a cup of tea. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my dreams. Not the pleading one from jail, or the cold one from the recordings. The young version, laughing on her bike, singing from the back seat. For a while, those dreams hurt. But over time, they started to feel like stories I once read. Distant, familiar, but no longer mine. She made her choice. And so did I. And this quiet life without her is the one I chose. Could you walk away from your own child if they betrayed you this deeply? Would forgiveness come easy, or never at all? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe for more raw, real-life family dramas that make you question where your loyalty ends and your self-preservation begins. See you soon in the next story.